There's a big difference between having a psychedelic experience and actually doing something with it. You can have the breakthrough, the ego death, that moment when everything suddenly seems to make sense, but then you have to go home. You have to go back to your relationships, your habits, your job, your problems, they're all still there. You have to figure out whether any of it, what you experienced, actually changes the way you live. Welcome back to the Virgin States. I'm Elite, back with Bryan. How you doing, man?
What's up, dude?
Oh, not a lot. Yeah, you couldn't make this interview with me. It's too
No,
bad, but
life's been a fucking hectic, crazy, wild mess lately, and
yeah,
but like in a good way. Like everything is starting to
right.
sort itself out. There's a lot of really fun things that I'm getting to do, so I'm happy about it. But I'm also sad that I wasn't able to make yet another episode.
Hey, it happens. It's all right. I've done a few solos now. I got the hang of it, but I'm glad you're back with me, and hope to have you back on some of the interviews coming up.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. We'll welcome to have you back, and we'll be getting into some more interviews coming up in the next couple episodes.
Yeah, we've got some good stuff coming up.
Today, we're going to be talking with Jonathan Schechter. He's the host of Vital Point, Pathways to Integration, and the founder of Pathways Integration. His work combines meditation, breathwork, somatic practices, and integration coaching for people working with psychedelics and other altered states. What I liked about this conversation really is that Jonathan doesn't really approach it as somebody telling you what your experience meant. He's much more interested in what happens afterwards. Did anything change? Did the insight hold up? Did you become more present or more grounded, more honest with yourself? We talk a lot about the difference between insight and integration, what the biggest experience, or how the biggest experience isn't always the most useful one, and his distinction between what he calls portals and pathways, the dramatic experience he can move somewhere new versus the slower work of actually figuring out how to live there. Maybe the goal isn't always another breakthrough. Maybe sometimes the work is considerably less exciting. You chop wood, you carry water, and if you see anything, you see if anything actually changed. So we're going to be talking with Jonathan Schechter. We've also got new music from Dill Alien coming up with you. He's got a new album that dropped. You guys check him out.
Right, he totally hooked us up with some of the first music that we ever used on the podcast, outside of our intro music, which is badass. Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, he's a great supporter of the. Yeah, we're probably going to have him back on pretty soon. So you guys check out his music, check out Spotify, and give him a listen. We'll be right back with Jonathan Schechter. So, our guest today is Jonathan Schechter. Jonathan is the host of Vital Point Pathways to Integration and the founder of Blue Magic Alchemy, which is now developing into a broader Pathways to Integration community. His work combines breathwork, meditation, somatic practices, and integration coaching for people working with psychedelics and other altered states. So, Jonathan, welcome to Divergent States.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
it's great. You reached out to me on Reddit, and it's so good to hear from other people within the Psychonaut community. And I love to feature them. I feature a lot of the music from Psychonaut too. So yeah, welcome. Glad you're here.
Yeah.
So before you were an integration coach and a breathwork facilitator, what were you personally trying to understand or change?
Well, I came to more conscious psychedelic work through very recreational background. I was married for almost 12 years, and most of my psychedelic use during that time was non existent and then hidden because my ex wife did not really approve of it. So I went from being sober to having a friend um, asked me if I wanted to go to the Movement Music Festival in Detroit, which is a huge techno festival. And when we were there, he said, "Hey, I have these mushroom chocolates. Are you interested?" And I had been completely sober from everything for about 10 years prior to that, and then had recently started to dabble into smoking pot and drinking again. And I can get into a little bit more about that journey. um, but the going back and experiencing psilocybin again, especially in that rave environment, was like coming home, and really started to create some questions about, am I in the right place in my life? Are the people around me who I want to be associating with? Am I spending my time in a way that is fulfilling? And so I started to have these once a year experiences where I would actually be house sitting for him. He would go on vacation. I would be house sitting for his cats, and I would do the whole Terrence McKenna 5 grams in the dark kind of experience, because I knew that was like the only time I would be undisturbed. And I didn't really know anything about integration. I, I'm old enough that when I was taking psychedelics in high school, there was no internet, there was no access to the knowledge base that we have now. But it started to really bring up some big questions in my life, and then I started to take better care of myself, go back to therapy, restart my meditation practice. And I had this big psychedelic experience, what you would call an ego death, even though I didn't really know what that was about. I live in Tucson. I went up in the mountains with a friend and onto Mount Lemon, and literally, as the mushrooms are kicking in, thought, I'm going to die on this mountain. Like, everything started to disintegrate around me. And when I came out of it, there was this beautiful, beautiful conversation that began between myself and the mycelium. And it really, looking back on that journey, helped me to not only leave this marriage that was not in alignment. It helped me heal my relationship with my dad and kind of propel me into the next chapter of my life. So, yeah, that was where it kind of started, and it all blossomed from there.
And so you kind of mentioned meditation. What role did meditation originally play in your life before this?
We'll be right back.
Hey, before we get started, a quick word about Patreon. Supporting Divergent States gives you access to full video episodes, extended conversations, bonus material, and a closer look behind the scenes. More importantly, though, it helps keep the show independent, thoughtful, and free from pressure to chase sponsors or soften difficult questions. If you enjoy what we're building and you want more of it, you can find the Patreon link in the show notes. Let's get on to the show.
Yeah, so I've been meditating and practicing Buddhism primarily in the Tibetan traditions for 22, 23 years. And it really changed my life drastically when it happened. Um, I was working in insurance and trying to become a professional DJ. It was like at a semi-professional level. My mentor was saying, you're about 3 months away from being able to quit your day job in insurance and do this full time. And my grandmother had gone into the hospital, and my dad would call me almost every day and tell me, you need to come to the hospital because I think this is going to be it. And I would go to the hospital and I would spend all day with her, and then I would go home. And this had been going on for a couple of weeks, and I remember feeling like really frustrated. Like, doesn't my dad know that I have a life? I can't just be completely disrupted by this. And I ended up going, and I got to the hospital. Everybody else in my family was there. My dad leaned over to his mom and said, Mom, Jonathan's here. You can go. And it was within like 30 seconds of that happening that she passed. And there was something palpable. There was something like visceral that was happening in the room. Like, and it was completely unexplained. I had never experienced anything like that before. And um, for the next couple of days, I could feel her presence, and she was talking to me. And I ended up going to a bookstore, and I only read fiction at the time. Like, I hadn't read a nonfiction book outside of school for years. And I was walking through this bookstore. I felt her hand like on my chest, and she said, like, you need to turn down this aisle. And I'm like, okay. So I'm walking down this aisle, and she told me where to stop. And it was the section on spirituality, and specifically on Buddhism. And like, I was directed to grab this book and open it up. And the first thing I read was, don't trust anything that it says in this book, even if it's the Buddha telling you. Like, you have to go have your own experience. And that really appealed to me. I really dove into Buddhism after that, and that ended up taking me from working in insurance, wanting to be a professional nightclub DJ, to moving to rural New York to be on my grandfather's farm and get ready for a long-term meditation retreats, and eventually led me to live in Tibet for a year. Mainly in a monastery at about like 11, 12,000 feet elevation with no running water or electricity. So that was a huge pivotal experience in my life that, when I came back to the States, started to like kind of fade out as I sort of reintegrated into American society. And in the midst of my marriage falling apart, I had this insight of like, why did I ever stop meditating? This really had transformed me. Like, it helped me get sober. It helped me get out of this career that I wasn't happy in. It helped me, follow my own dharma. And so I started to meditate, and I set the goal January 1st, 2018, to meditate every day for a year. And by the end of that year, I had left that marriage, and a bunch of other really cool things had happened because of going back to this practice that was really, really pivotal for me.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really important piece of information. Like, as you said with the book, don't believe anything in here, even if it's told to you by the Buddha. It's. I think
Yeah.
that's really a key insight for all psychonauts. Is we're out there looking for our own path to find, to experience this directly, and not necessarily just from hearing other people. So that's a good lesson to take away. Um, was there a particular experience where you realized that like having an insight was not the same as necessarily changing?
Ooh, yeah. Well, that very pivotal journey that I mentioned earlier, last year I found a journal, because I didn't know what integration was, but I've always journaled. And I found this journal that I had written in the day after that journey. And looking back on it in hindsight, it was so it was so obvious that I wanted to leave my marriage. I had written in it directly, like, I need to heal my relationship with my dad. But those things didn't, it wasn't like the light bulb went off and then I went home and checked things off of a list. With my dad, it was many years of healing, having hard conversations, tears on both of our parts, and acceptance and forgiveness for me. And then with my marriage, wow, I mean, that's been years of unraveling, like, why did I stay in this situation that wasn't aligned, that was borderline abusive? How come I didn't stand up for myself sooner? And what were the patterns that were underneath that, keeping me there? And then, even a more direct version, uh, the next year that I went back to movement, because I went back a few years in a row, and in the middle of a mushroom journey, got this message from the mushrooms very, very clearly. You need to stop drinking. And the mushrooms kept telling me that for like 3 or 4 years after, you know. And so, yeah, it wasn't just having this insight of like, oh yeah, this is not helping you, you need to stop doing this. It really took a while of, hey, like, getting this message repeatedly, having this insight every single time I would take psychedelics, almost, before I actually figured out how to stop, and make that change.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Big gap between insight and
Right.
integration.
Yeah, I think one of the earliest, in fact, uses for LSD was curing people of alcoholism, and then part of that, I think, is especially like you get that's such an awe-inspiring experience, to where you're like, oh wow, what am I doing with myself? But yeah, I'm not a big drinker either. I think that's part of it. Is always loved psychedelics. I have kind of a similar, as you talked about. Took a big break kind of midlife, and but even then, when I was younger, really wasn't. I did drink when I was younger, but not. I can't remember about a specific experience though. Just stopped appealing to me, I guess. But so when did you start feeling, qualified to move from working on yourself to helping someone else interpret and integrate like an altered state experience?
It's been a journey. I mean, the first thing that happened was the breath work. I was taking psychedelics much more intentionally. I was learning about, ceremonial use, and going to ayahuasca ceremonies, and taking mushrooms ceremonially, which was a new thing for me. And yeah, then that's where I started hearing about this word integration. And at the time, I was fresh out of this messy divorce. I had a lot of things that I was working on myself. So it made sense to me. And alongside the integration came the breath work. And, fortunately for me, I've been connected to the work of Stan Grof through breath work, pretty much from the get-go. And so that laid like a really important foundation for me, because, according to that framework, a holotropic experience has to have these three parts. It has to have preparation, some sort of experience of altered states of consciousness, and then integration. And there's so much stress around the integration being the most important part of it. It's not how many mushrooms you can eat, or how long you can breathe for, how many tears you cry, in whatever it is. It's really like, what are you doing with that afterwards? That really created a nice foundation for me to continue my own work and my own curiosity. And also, it was a real revelation to me, for understanding that some of the things that I had experienced in my own psychedelic work, but I didn't have anybody to talk to about them, that there was this bigger framework that was already, like, I'd stumbled across it. I didn't know the language, I didn't know the words, but everything that I was learning, through Grof, was very aligned with what I had already discovered experientially. And so, like, it really helped to, really give me confidence in that model and in that framework.
Right. And a lot of times I'll give credit to, especially the underground movement, for keeping a lot of that framework alive and passing it down, whether it's explicit as with Groff or just implicit through, hey, this is how things should be done. So,
Yeah. I remember there was when you go through the Grof transpersonal training, which is the training for holotropic breath work, there's one of the things that I remember being completely blown away by is his perinatal matrices, which is what he describes as how the birth process affects us, the imprints that it leaves on our subconscious, on our psyche, and how those experiences manifest or can be presented during psychedelic journeys, or really any altered state of consciousness, breathwork being just as potent sometimes as those psychedelics. And it answered this question that I had always been curious about, which is, why do people have such how come there's such a strong number of people that have the same experiences with psychedelics? Like, what's the explanation for that? And here was this very, to me, like clear explanation. It's like, well, we have these similar experiences during the birth process, and it leaves these imprints on our psyche, and then we are re-experiencing those during the trip, because we've never, we didn't come out of the womb going, hey, I need to talk to a therapist
Right.
about this, right? Some of us have never had the experience or the opportunity to process these things. The imprint is just there. And so it was like things like that where it really made me have more faith in this model, and also just the whole thing that we have this piece of ourselves that's moving towards wholeness, and that my job as a facilitator, as an integration coach, is not to tell you what the answers are to your experience. I get that all the time with clients, or people come out of the breath work and they're like, hey, this happened, what does this mean? And it's like, okay, well, what do you think it means?
Right.
Like, like, isn't that more important than what you think, what I think about it? So, um, that really is what I believe is my role here, is I can support you through it. I can help keep you safe. I can be there to help you process things, but it's not my job to be a guru, or, a shaman, or, dictate or interpret what your experience is. And that feels really aligned to me, especially right now, where there's so much coming out of the underground and coming into the mainstream. And, according to Grof, psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. And so, there's a lot of ego and, other things that are getting amplified alongside with the healing and the positive parts. So there's a lot of people in the space right now that I think are getting sort of this inflated sense of grandeur or self-importance. And it's easy to take advantage of people when they're in a fragile state coming out of a psychedelic experience. And it's something that I just really want to stay away from, and not be a
Yeah,
part
we
of.
talk about Bob, the cul-de-sac shaman. He's kind of our generic catch-all for the shaman type. Kind of moving back to what you're mentioning with your clients. Is there something that you do differently now than like when you first began?
Yeah, when I first began my practice, I felt was much more one-dimensional. I had some breathwork training, but it was mainly in this, what I would call transformational breath work, where you're all entering an altered state through the breath. And then I had the opportunity to go and work in a residential treatment center with people with substance abuse problems, with anxiety disorders, with depression. And I mean this in the kindest way possible. A lot of the people that I was working with weren't ready for these crazy deep dive psychedelic breathwork experiences. So that's where I started doing more somatic work, because that was something that I had been doing on my own as a client, not only for my own psychedelic integration, but for healing my trauma. And being able to have a much more multidimensional sort of toolkit to know how to support people through nervous system regulation, and not just, hey, let's take you out into the deep end of some sort of altered state of consciousness and hope for the best. So that's definitely one way that my practice has evolved. The other is really through the training with Grof transpersonal training. I very distinctly remember one of my mentors. Her name's Diana Medina. She's the main trainer that kind of took over. The lineage kind of goes Stan and Christina Grof, and then Tav and Carrie Sparks, and then now Diana is the main trainer there. And she said something once in a training that really stuck with me, which was, my job as a facilitator is to believe in your inner healer until you believe in your inner healer. And that has become like a real North Star to my own kind of philosophy and the way that I try to hold space and support people. So yeah, just that training in general really helped to kind of flesh things out and make me much more aware of like what was happening to people, in a psychedelic experience. The other is just experiencing trauma of my own. I had an experience in the middle of a mushroom journey where I experienced a shock trauma, and it's left a pretty lasting impression on my life and in my psychedelic work. And before that happened, I was very much part of that. Kind of, there's a pretty popular belief out there in the larger psychedelic community. You see it on, when you go to Psychonaut, our Psychonaut, right? Of there's no such thing as a bad trip. And that may or may not be true depending on what you think, but there certainly is trauma, and trauma is trauma whether you're in a psychedelic state or not. And when you are in an altered state, it makes the trauma a lot more intense and leaves a bigger imprint. And so experiencing that in the middle of a mushroom journey really changed the way that I understood and had empathy for people that had gone through, big traumatic incidences, not just complex trauma, but shock traumas, assaults, things that are not easily recoverable from. And that really changed the way that I would approach and meet people.
Yeah, it makes a difference, especially having that firsthand kind of knowledge of what that's like. It really, pushes you to, as you said, to empathize with people more and sympathize. So yeah, it's an important, an important thing that you can kind of, it takes time, I guess, to kind of, to go from, conceptually, this is how this should go to, what actually happens as you're going through the experience.
That's it exactly. I had my trauma work up until this experience was strictly complex trauma. And so I thought, oh yeah, I understand this conceptually. I understand complex trauma from my own life, but I thought that that's where it sort of ended. And then having a shock trauma and being like, oh, this completely transformed my life. And I feel like I'm pretty well resourced. I've been meditating for this many years. I have all these tools that I've learned through therapy and through other, inner work that I've done. And I'm completely falling apart here. No wonder there's an opiate epidemic in our country, because the average person that's had these traumatic experiences doesn't have half the tools that I have. What are they doing? Right. And so it really helps me to understand, I think, and be able to meet people at a much better place.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see how that. I mean, as far as my own experience as well, just helps me kind of. If I see somebody and they're kind of freaking out or something, I know where they've been. I've been kind of the same area too.
Absolutely.
So kind of moving on further
Yeah.
in, more back on the what we're talking about. When you use the word integration, what exactly are you describing?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? Because I think there's there's levels to it, I believe. I think sometimes people hear it as a buzzword, and it might be go to a circle after you have a ceremony, or there's the things that are just best practices for life in general, whether you're doing psychedelics or not, like having a meditation practice, taking care of your sleep and your diet. Do you have people in your life that you can talk to and can support you if you need it? But then there's the things that come up in the journey work itself, in the medicine work. Like you might get a really strong message or a really strong insight, and it feels so clear and so valid in that moment. Just like we were saying earlier, like the insight doesn't equal the integration. I remember being in these ayahuasca circles, and we would be talking beforehand and hearing these people saying some version of, well, I'm back here again. Well, I stopped drinking for a couple months, but then, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so I started to ask myself this question of like, okay, well, if they're having this experience, if I'm having this experience, like what's the missing link here? So I think integration takes time and intention. I often use the metaphor of like a seed, planting a seed. And when you plant a seed, you don't like dig it up every day and check the roots and make sure that it's growing. But if you're watering it, if you're placing it in the right place, as far as light and nutrients, you can trust that something's going to happen. And you might not know exactly when or how, but it's like, how am I open? How am I creating the right conditions so that seed can begin to sprout and to blossom and um, eventually fruit? Sometimes the vision seems so clear, and it's following the thread or the crumbs towards that vision that might lead you in a completely different result, but still something that is very integrative, is very enriching to your life. So yeah, it's not always linear. There's so much symbolism. There's so many archetypal kind of experiences within these journeys. And it's not always this linear thing of like, okay, I saw X and I'm going to do Y because of that. Sometimes we really have to take some time and just be intentional with it. There's a friend of mine, uses this example when we do integration circles together of like, um, you have a gift, and you might take that gift and you might like put it on your mantle and be so excited about it, and you're like, wow, the wrapping paper is so shiny, and like I'm so excited about this. Or you might take it and throw it in your basement and forget about it. But either way, you're not really unwrapping what's inside, so it's really being able to engage in that material, and having the support of someone that can be there, not only to have a regulated nervous system and maybe to help you navigate through the somatic experience of that, the symbolic aspect of that, rather than, oh yeah, you saw Ganesha, so like maybe sell all your uh, possessions and move to India. I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah, and kind of on the flip side of that, do you ever see like the purpose of integration to challenge the way your insights or challenge the experience, or versus simply trying to preserve it?
That's a great question. There's this saying, that Grof was fond of saying, like, if if it's a good idea today or this week, it'll be a good idea in 6 months. So sometimes that's the other side of it too. Is like, hey, what would it be like to sit with this and just not take action right away? Um, because yeah, things can develop and open up as you work with it. And the I use the joke of seeing Ganesha and moving to an ashram, kind of as a joke. But I had something like that similar happen to me, where there was this presence of a deity that was too important to ignore, and there was other people in the room that saw it too, which made it even more intense. And then in the aftermath of that, it was like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, should I just renounce everything and like move to an ashram and just dedicate my life to, to this deity? Like, what's the deal? And that would have been one path to take. I don't think it was necessarily the right one. I certainly wouldn't be talking with you here if I had done that. So yeah, I think there is some validity to letting things marinate a little bit.
Yeah, one of my long-standing rules I've used for a long time is no important life decisions during the experience. Like as you said, if it's going to be
That's right.
good now, you'll be okay doing it tomorrow or a month down the road. So, but yeah, that once got kept me from doing some random shit a couple times. So
I was in Sedona, and and I was reading a book about the geology and like how the rocks have shifted, over this span of millions of years, from like Colorado into Sedona or vice versa. I'm not probably getting this wrong, um, but I remember feeling, wow, the sense of scale of time that we have as human beings is so skewed. Like, we have to do it right now, and the earth doesn't move that way. Like, here's these rocks that have taken millions of years to shift and to become what we know of as today. And to me, like, being out in nature has had a really big impact on my own integration. I live in Tucson, and being able to go out and sit with these saguaros, cactuses that are, some of them, hundreds of years old, and really try to like connect with their energy and their consciousness of like, wow, like we must be moving in, like, like when you see like the fast forwarded, the time lapse type things, um, that that must be what it's like for them. And the benefit and wisdom of just slowing down and, just being. What happens when you're present? There's so much in our life today that is taking us away from presence. It's almost this radical act of rebellion at this point to not be multitasking, to be able to slow down and meditate, or take, not only just like the afternoon of eating mushrooms or whatever it is, but like to take some time in preparation, in integration. Um, that's that's not normal these days. We're all kind of moving so fast, and um, having our attention spans vied for by corporations and people with billions of dollars of capital behind them.
yeah, that's I mean, yeah, that's always seems to be the issue. A lot of times, there's always somebody with money trying to grab your attention. So you kind of talked about paths earlier, and you distinguish between portals and pathways in your recent work. What would you say is
Yeah.
the difference there?
Yeah, so I started using this metaphor, especially with how prevalent psychedelics are getting. Um, that the psychedelic experience, like that meta 5 gram mushroom or ayahuasca experience, those experiences where people are talking about, like, I had 5 years of therapy in one night, something like that. That's like a portal. You jump through the portal and you're not able to come back to the other side. You kind of land somewhere where you're disoriented. You're not really sure where you are. And that can really create this quantum leap forward, but it's also disorienting, right? When you land, you've lost your orientation to the territory. And that within the psychedelic world today, that there's too much emphasis placed on the portal experience and not so much on the pathway, which is like slow and steady, predictable, maybe not as flashy, doesn't get as many clicks, but as far as your integration goes, is much more reliable. Like there are people that are, you see it a lot, especially on social media, where they're like, I did 100 ayahuasca, ceremonies, but they might not, be able to relate to their kids or their friends or their neighbors. They might not be able to find their keys. Um, so like the whole life becomes the looking for the next portal experience. I just got to keep jumping and finding the next portal. Whereas, finding your own path, uh, it's not as sexy, doesn't get as many clicks, but it's so reliable. Like, meditation is such a great example because, personally, I think one of the secrets to meditation is to just let go of having any outcome or like any benefit from it. Like, you show up and just do the practice. Like, the practice is the path. And if you can just simply trust that putting one foot in front of the other is going to lead you someplace good, um, good things happen. Um, so yeah, I found in my work, like, everyone has their own approach, but having, a focus and an emphasis on those pathways, whether that's meditation, breath work, being more embodied, and having somatic resources that, you can use to understand your own experience, your own triggers, where you're, maybe kind of not embodied, is a much easier way to go. Um, as far as, spiritual growth or, individual development.
Yeah. How much would you say integration is more about like repetition rather than revelation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot. Like, the integration is, I think integration is that saying of, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, and after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. For me, there's been so much integration this year around my physical health, physical fitness, changing my diet, things that have nothing to do with, quote unquote, psychedelics or my psychedelic, experiences directly, but have everything to do with how I feel internally, how I'm able to be present in my life, and being able to take those habits that I'm learning and apply them to other things, in my business, or in my relationships, rather than just, searching for some new quick fix. What I see with a lot of my clients that have been following their own path for quite some time is they start to notice how the integration is seeping into their life off of the cushion or the breathwork mat. They're like, hey, I was in the doctor's office and something happened, and I saw my default pattern coming online, and I was able to observe it and breathe through it, or apply this breathing technique, and, stay more centered and not get triggered or not kind of lose my way. Or, they're wow, I'm noticing these little moments of, connection, of embodiment, of regulation that I would have completely skipped over, and moved past or not even noticed before. And those are the moments that I think are really important to really, pay attention to. It's not necessarily those big giant revelations. It's how am I showing up and being a better partner or a better human being, a better friend. Um, how am I taking care of myself, my family, my community? It's the little things that start to add up rather than the big, cloud parting, and, like the angelic choir is, going off. Like, those moments happen, but, um, tend to slip away, whereas the chopping the wood and carrying the water tends to, have better dividends in the end.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's the psychedelic culture itself where we tend to want to chase those peak experiences versus the, as you say, the slow chop wood, carry water, how to refine our daily activities. And so I think part of it is it's just the nature of the beast itself. But part of it is, as you mentioned earlier, we're very kind of, um, how would I put it? I guess, impatient as a species, the human race. We're just impatient kind of a lot of times. And
Yeah.
rather,
I think it's coming home to yourself. You know, you're going from this turning the lens, looking for answers outwards, to coming back to yourself, to realizing that those answers were inside of you all along. You just didn't have the tools or the capability to hear them, or there was something obscuring that message or that voice. And again, to borrow from Grof, that search for wholeness, that orientation towards wholeness, that's there. It's a part of our humanity. And just like the journey of the alchemist, like having to travel the world to come back to the treasure that was underneath your pillow the whole time.
yeah, I like that analogy. That's a good one. Um, but yeah, I think, yeah, it's I'm kind of at a loss for words on that one. Let me gather that real quick. It
Yeah.
is a very a lot, as you said, it's returning home. It's that you kind of remember, as we've talked about earlier in the episode as well, that just kind of being comfortable with yourself, of kind of finding that place that where you are okay with yourself. And I think that's a lot to do with the integration of a lot of this. And to me, I mean, just to kind of throw it out there, to me, that anytime I've had a negative experience with psychedelics or otherwise, it's almost always been when I've been most uncomfortable with myself. Like there was something inside of me that wasn't jiving, and so that's I had to learn to change that. And after I did, I seem to have a lot better time. So after everything you've experienced and everything you've heard from your guests on your show, or even in your own coaching experience, what is it you think that probably produces the most lasting change?
I think being honest with yourself, and looking for that authenticity within yourself, right? Like that, it's that journey of the lens moving from the outward focus back inward. And that's going to look different for every single person, even though there might be some signposts or some touch points that are, that are similar along the way. It's really about like, who do I want to show up as, and like, what do I want to put out in the world? I love, past guest on my show that I've been fortunate enough to become friends with, Pierre Bouchard, talks about the triple axis of, psychedelic experiences, that you have the biographical material on the x-axis, the transpersonal on the y-axis, but then the z-axis is, how am I applying this? Like, how is this making me a better human? um, you know, just taking 5 grams of mushrooms or whatever it is isn't going to make me a better person by virtue of taking it. But it's like, how am I taking the insights and the experience that I have, and then um, putting that out into the world? And so many of the people that I've met through my podcast, um, have that's what they've done. They've transmuted their struggle or some sort of adversity that they went through, and then as they come out on the other side of it, say, well, gee, now that I've come out of the woods, I need to go back in and help other people that are on a similar path, having a similar struggle. And that's where I see my clients, they're at some stage of that. Like, they might be right at the beginning of that experience or that journey. They might be figuring out, how do I change this pattern, or leave this relationship or this job that I'm discovering I'm not fulfilled in. But then what's going to fill that, you know that void, or like, what's my new direction going to be? And ultimately, it's just applying these tools and having these medicines, these experiences, to help support that journey of self discovery along the way.
Yeah, the being honest with yourself. I like to call that epistemic hygiene. That's a good way to just be honest with yourself a little bit, and that seems to work the best, especially with powerful substances like psychedelics or even breath work. You're doing your own journeys through that. Real quick, where can people find the Vital Point and learn more about your work?
Pathways2integration.com is my website. I have Pathways to Integration on School as well. That's a free community that you can join. There's live and recorded breath work and meditation there. You can find Pathways to Integration, the podcast, on all the platforms. So yeah, if you search for my name or Pathways to Integration, you'll find
Nice.
me.
Yeah, and we'll throw you in the show notes too. So if anybody's listening, they can check it out there. Before we wrap up the public
Awesome.
episode, Jonathan's going to stick around with us for a little bit for the extended Patreon conversation. We're going to talk a little bit more personally about his own psychedelic experiences, lessons that do not hold up afterward, the limits of integration culture, some of the things podcast hosts may be reluctant to say publicly about the field. Patreon supporters also receive the full video version of the podcast, extended conversations, early access when available, and other material that does not make it into the public release. So supporting the show through Patreon helps us continue independent conversations without turning this podcast into a marketing platform. And you can join through the link in the episode description. Jonathan, again, thanks for joining us. For anybody publicly listening, you can find The Vital Point, Pathways Integration, wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can find Jonathan's work through the links in the episode description. Jonathan's going to stick around. Patreon supporters, we're going to get more into the personal and uncomfortable side of integration, including whether the integration industry may sometimes create dependency, reinforce questionable beliefs, or become another product people are told they need. And for everyone else, thanks for listening. Until next time, stay curious. And so that was Jonathan Schechter. Man, it was too bad you couldn't be there with us, Bryan, but what'd you think?
Well, okay, I really like his perspective on it. I feel like out of everything that we've done in the past, like he's very grounded, and I don't know. I feel like I want to push back on the bad trip because I've had a bad trip, but at the same time, like I also agree that it's still useful. Like it's still useful information,
Right.
but his whole stance on like using it to become a better person, especially in regards to like
He actually pushed back on the ideas there was no such thing as a bad trip. He said that there is, and it can definitely cause more trauma than, especially
yeah.
when you're in one of those heavy states.
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. I definitely agree that it can cause more trauma because I know that my experience, like it stuck with me for a very long time. But what I really like I was saying, is around just becoming a better person and treating better people better, and like taking what you can from it. I couldn't agree anymore with that. Um, Particularly around like things like like drinking and just how you're like treating people. Like drinking is a huge thing in the military, so obviously that's something that is carried over into my regular life. Even as I drink a beer right now as we discuss this.
Right, exactly.
But I think there's a lot of value in what he has to say. 100%. This is a fantastic episode.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. There's a lot in here about something I think psychedelic culture really sometimes overlooks. Having an experience is the easy part. Figuring out what, if anything, you should actually do with it is considerably harder.
Yes.
Jonathan also stuck around for the Patreon conversation. We loosened up a little. We got into some subjects that are harder to fit in the public episode, like the integration industry itself, some of the beliefs
Yes.
within psychedelic culture that deserve more skepticism, and whether people might sometimes be better off doing less psychedelic work rather than something more.
Well, yeah, he talks about the heroic dose and it being, maybe not the best thing. It's
Yeah,
and I
not
agree
everybody
with that.
needs.
I agree with that. You don't. It's not to say anything bad against anybody who's done those kind of things, and not to put down what they took away from that. I feel like people probably walked away with profound experiences and profound understanding from doing something like that. But I would agree with him that maybe that's not for everybody, and you don't need to take it that far, and you don't need to traumatize yourself in order to walk away with something valuable.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to hear the rest of that conversation, you can go to patreon.com/divergent states. Check it out on there. Join, become a microdoser. Less than a hit of acid a month. You can listen to the extended conversations, see some videos. If you're on the higher tiers, it's a good time for everybody. You can message us directly. You got questions. We're starting live streams for some of the higher tier members too. So if you want to get over there and join, become like a macro tier or a heroic doser, you can watch the live stream. So also check out the Zendo project for psychedelic peer support, harm reduction resources. You can use our code if you want to take their SIT training, Divergent S10. We'll get 10% of that. You get 10% off. Works out for everybody.
Well, and so I just want to add this in there. We just started doing this. We made our very first private Patreon only episode. And
we'll be getting that up pretty quick. So
yeah, we'll have that out there. So that's something we're going to continue to do. So if you want to come in and get that private Patreon episode that's coming out, I think we're just going to do one a month right now.
Yeah, and something like that, I think.
Depending on its popularity, we may increase that. But yeah, if you come check it out.
Yeah, so you get a whole extra episode that way. So come check us out, divergentstates.com or Divergent States, patreon.com/Divergent States. Come check us out there, and we'll see you guys next time. Psychedelics can take you deep, but you don't have to go at it alone. Fireside Project is your trusted companion on the psychedelic path. If you're having a tough trip, their free, anonymous support line is just a call or text away at 62-FIRESIDE. Planning the journey? Fireside certified coaches offer personalized video sessions to help you prepare and integrate, starting with a free 20-minute consult. Whether you're on the path, in the middle of it, or just getting started, Fireside is here for you. Learn more at firesideproject.org.